Based on my last startup, the number one problem I was trying to solve was actually, like, if you're not serving customers, if you're not solving their problem and like making money, you're not actually creating like any value.
What's your hiring blueprint? I mean, I get it, the work needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that's not everything. How do I even break into startup?
So number one,
Why work at a startup in the first place? Usually it's a lot of hours, lesser pay, or at least same pay as big tech. I'm working way more. So why work in a startup?
okay, so
What's up, Rishi? How's it going?
It's going well, man. Thanks for coming to the office. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. For those who don't know, I'm in beautiful San Francisco in Rishi's office
Beautiful
here.
15th and Mission, the most attractive part of the city where everyone wants to be.
Exactly.
Under the highway.
Absolutely, man. So for those who don't know, we have Rishi Raman here. He is a startup veteran. He went to USC. He has worked in 2 other startups. You were a head of growth at one of them. And he's a founder himself. He has had 2 startups. One of them he pivoted, but he's a YC startup. So for those who don't know Y Combinator, it's one of the top accelerators out there, startup accelerators out there. And he's the current founder of Quill. So nice to have you here, man. My first question, I just want to dive right into it.
Let's go.
Why startups? Why not just work at big tech, dude? What's the deal with startup?
That's a good question. I mean, it's very generic, but I think it's always a good question. So I have like 2 answers for you. So number one is kind of the organic answer. You know, what do they say? Like Steve Jobs, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. But you know, in reality, like my first job out of college was a sales job in tech. I landed there almost somewhat accidentally. I just was interested in sales. I thought it was a good skill I should pick up. I was lucky enough to be born and raised in the Bay Area. So the people I was surrounded by were tech people. So I ended up in tech almost accidentally. And from there is really where I started to build interest. Is once you're actually working, I actually really like sales a lot. I really enjoyed the work culture where I started. And I consider myself a little bit of a people person, like more extroverted than introverted for sure. And so just building relationships with the people you work with. And you quickly realize, especially where, you know, in tech, we're at a small community relatively and people move around a lot. You're never more than 1 or 2 degrees removed from almost anybody. You really want to follow like good people was like my attitude. And so that's all I did. I like the VP and director for my first job left and went to the same company. And so they were both not only the 2 best people I worked with, they both went to the same company. I didn't even know what this company did. I just was like, if they went there, I have to go there. Okay. And so the VP and the director told like us, hey, you know, the director was my direct report. I was his direct report. And he said, you know, I can't bring people from the company, blah, blah, blah. The VP like knew me a little bit. We had some interactions, but we didn't even live in the same state. So I actually cold called the VP and actually asked him and like pitched him on like bringing me to the next job. And he was like, yeah, of course, like we'll bring you along. And so it's kind of things like that happen super organically. And then I just naturally kept going to smaller and smaller companies. So the first company I was at was like a very kind of growth stage startup, maybe Series C, something like that. The startup after that had just closed their Series A. After that company, I went to Clerk, which was like seed, even pre-seed. And I think just every experience made me want to have more ownership and be like closer and closer to like that founding experience. And so that's really why, is just like it's an organic, natural move there.
Let's take a step back, I guess. So let's dive deeper into Quill. You're the co-founder of Quill. Can you tell us a bit about your story, your founding story? You know, why Quill, why this problem, your YC story, you know, how you raised. Yeah, just give our viewers some context about how this whole thing became the startup it is today.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'll start with explaining like what Quill is, what my personal attachment to the idea is, and I can just share maybe like the organic story of how we got there.
Keep going. Keep going.
Because like, you know, I think as people say, there's always like there's like the actual story, and then there's like the iterated on story. And even someone like YC will tell you to constantly iterate. on your founding story.
Yeah.
And so I think as a founder, as you tell your story over and over again, as you iterate on your story, I think it's good to remember. I always keep two stories in my mind, because I think if you only keep the iterated one, you actually forget what actually happened. And like, even if it's not necessary to share, it's like good to know what your actual reality was. But yeah, so what is Quill? So Quill is a full stack toolkit to build customer facing analytics. Customer facing analytics are the analytics UI or UX elements that you see in like almost any software app. Like there's very few, if any, examples of software that I've seen that don't have analytics. So as an example, if you use Twitter, the bottom of a tweet has like a retweet, a comment number. It even has like a little analytics button, I think now, which gives you some analytics.
Yeah.
Those are all analytics features. Those are all customer facing analytics. If you're on the business side and you're doing advertising on Twitter, pretty much most of the app is analytics. It's showing you like cost per click, cost per whatever goal it is. You have performance metrics about how things are doing. I'm not wearing it right now. If we're like an Aura Ring and you look at the software app, Aura Ring is all charts, tables, analytics, etc. And then in B2B, like in B2B SaaS, like every single SaaS app for the most part has like an insights dashboard or something there. Now, the problem we're solving specifically is that there's never been a great way to ship these features. And what I mean by that is you really are forced down two roads. Both come with a lot of compromises. One is you either build completely in-house. So I was actually just talking to a guy today. He was an engineer on the Toast team many years ago when they were building out analytics.
Yeah.
And when you build it out yourself, it's great. You have full control. As a product or engineer, you can completely decide what that experience is, what the look, the feel is, what you're presenting to your customers. But it may take you years to develop your features correctly. You're going to iterate. And I think he mentioned they've been working on it for a few years, a few versions, and they still hadn't made it even like look good. He's like, we got functionality there, but we're still waiting for like V4 to make this all like look great. So not only did that require, potentially even millions of dollars, you're talking about many engineers over the course of years, but it took a huge amount of time, and it's still maybe not perfect. In some companies, there's no guarantee that they get anything good out the door at all. So great, lots of benefits, lots of negatives building in-house. The other option is using a category called embedded BI. Embedded BI is really a hack of BI tools. So BI tools like Sisense, Looker, Power BI, Metabase, etc. You can use these tools in an embedded context, meaning I can take this product, they've essentially like shrink wrapped it into an iframe, take that iframe and you embed that in your front end of the product. That's how you give your customers like dashboards or reporting, etc. Super fast relative to building in-house, get sophisticated features out of the box really quickly. Your timeline is more like months or weeks, sometimes days. The costs, they can be expensive tools, but you're not paying for many, many engineers over a long course of time. The maintenance is almost nothing, it's someone else's tool. But you have almost zero engineering and product control. Like a great company, a Stripe, a Rippling, Mercury, Linear, the products that people love, you would never see them use embedded BI. It looks weird. It never really matches the core product. They don't have control over the UI, UX, the design pattern. I mean, these are built for data practitioners, et cetera. So kind of long explanation of getting to the point of Quill is bringing these two worlds together. It's if you were to rebuild embedded BI as a developer tool so that you get the benefits of full product and engineering control like you get in-house, but the speed to value, the lack of tech debt, the sophisticated features out of the box of embedded BI, kind of put those two things together and give you the best of both worlds so that, hey, the best companies in the world can use this product and it will look exactly like their core product. They'll have every piece of control they need, yet they're not spending millions of dollars to build something which is not even their core product.
Makes sense.
So that's what Quill is. Now, the way we got here, I've personally done a bunch of analytics projects. So at TalkDesk, I was involved with helping build analytics in-house. Later on,
I assume this is some sort of like personal issue that you had as a developer, right?
Yes. So that's part of it. Like very much, like if I was to give you the connecting the dots looking backwards story, that's it. It's like I was a part of building TalkDesk embedded BI platform. So we ended up ripping out what we were doing internally. After some time, we got to larger customers, needed more sophisticated analytics. We just could not really deliver them through the home-built tool that we had, which is unfortunate because the home-built tool looked really good. Like it was a really good demo. It just wasn't like meeting actual functional needs. So then we did embedded Looker. At my first startup, which was a demand forecasting company, it was mostly like a back-end engineering problem. So on the front end, we actually used Power BI for the entire front-end app. It got built. It was a nightmare. So like these experiences have been very informative to Quill. Now, the way that I approached building the startup though was completely different. Based on my last startup, the number one problem I was trying to solve when starting a new startup was actually co-founder. Like finding the right co-founder and the right partner was, it was the number one priority for me. I think not doing a good job with that, not being really thoughtful about that in my first startup, I think ultimately is what was upstream of a lot of our other issues. Like all of our problems were downstream of like not having an ideal partnership at the co-founder level. And so when I was getting ready to start another company, the first thing I was solving for was finding someone I just really wanted to work with. I was like, look, if I can find someone I really wanted to work with, we can find a market together. If we can find a market together, the problems will come. When the problems come, you find a solution, and then you have a product and you have a company. And so that was the number one thing I wanted to solve for. And so Sean, my current co-founder, was someone I had known for a few years through just kind of the YC ecosystem. We were friends, we hung out, and I just thought he was a great engineer. Like not only a great engineer, but actually a great product guy as well. Like I'd seen him build multiple products, and I thought, wow, this guy can build anything at a pretty high quality and has a really good eye for like design, has very good product taste. When I met Sean, he was working alone, just pivoting, iterating on new ideas. And my thought was like, hey, this guy can probably build anything, but he's not like selling any of it. So how do you actually know if it's good? I'm not saying it's actually good or it's bad. I'm just saying you don't know if it's good if no one buys your product.
Yeah.
So when I met Sean, ironically, I asked him to grab lunch with me. He was like, hey, let's just go talk. Would love to like talk about startups. Kind of brought up the idea of potentially working together. And it was funny because he was like, I kind of wanted to work with you as well, but I didn't think you wanted to start another company. Like I thought you were kind of, I was working at Clerk at the time. He's like, you seem like you love Clerk. I figured you had no interest. I was like, no, I want to do this. So it was actually kind of perfect in that way. And then we kind of just went through all the things we would do and would not do. And so, like I had a series of things where I was like, I'm not going to do consumer. Hey, we should sell before we build, various things. And we kind of quickly came to alignment and we're like, great, like I think we agree on all these things. And towards the end of that conversation, Sean was like, well, let me show you something I've been working on. And what he was working on was a customer-facing SQL editor. And he hadn't really got through the full explanation yet, but I just heard SQL editor and I was like, this is trash. Like, no one needs another SQL editor. Whatever, like I'll humor this, but this is not the idea we're gonna do. Like we're gonna work on something else.
Yeah.
But anyways, he explained it and I realized that it was actually not like an internal like dev tool or thing for a data guy or a one-off person. But what he was actually building was like a white labeled version of Stripe Sigma. And so Stripe Sigma is a product that Stripe built for their customers. So if you're like Lyft, let's say, you use Stripe across your business, you have tons of financial data in Stripe. And let's say you're an analyst at Lyft. You're not an engineer, but you know some SQL, like a finance type person. If you have Stripe Sigma for like $50 a month, you can pay for a seat of Stripe Sigma. You log into Stripe, you get the customer-facing SQL editor, and you can expressively query any of your data out of the Stripe database. So you can write any customer report, any format, anything you want.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have a full data stack, like a modern data stack available to you, but you don't have to build it, you don't have to maintain it. It's not in your company, it's in Stripe. And so this was very interesting to me because I was like, okay, this is like a real problem. Like this is interesting. People are getting more technical, more people are learning to code. Maybe there's like a trend around like changing the way that people get data out of products. Like maybe it's becoming more technical and we should give people more of like an open-ended way to do that. And then a friend of ours also wanted this product. So he had a similar business to Stripe. It was like, think of it as like Stripe for healthcare. And he really wanted Sean to build this for him.
Okay.
And it wasn't like a one-off comment. It was like, he would ask him like 10 or 12 times. Like every time, hey, you should build it. Hey, you should build this. I could really use this. So we're like, all right, this guy is really smart. His business is doing super well. Stripe is super smart. They built this. Like, we're just two dumb guys. Like, what ideas do we have? Like, we should take the good idea from these two guys. So we figured, okay, let's do this. Started working on that.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I think we were a little overconfident. I mean, we're like, it's over. Product market fit. It's done. Like, we already have a customer.
Yeah.
Stripe built this. And we had a really hard time selling it. Just the SQL editor itself, I think what we, TLDR is there's just not that many end users, that many end business users that know SQL or even want to write SQL, even if like they know SQL. And so but like the process of like building and trying to sell that product led us to what Quill is today. And so we have another customer who's actually a customer today where one of their founders got on a call with me and was like, I really like what you've got here. I think this is really interesting. I could see myself maybe getting this in the next quarter. We do have like a reporting problem. But he said, if I can add visualizations, so after I get the query, after I get the table kind of report back, if I can add a chart, create a visualization off of that, I'll buy that right now. So we're like, great. We were thinking the same thing. We've been working on that actually. It's in beta. Done. So we sold that to him, jumped on the call with Sean right after the demo. I was like, Sean, we're now a visualization company. I need you to build a demo that shows that we have visualizations. So I can send it to this guy, send it to him. He's like, great, bought it. And like to Sean's credit, he built it in like 2 days. And from there, we just kind of followed like, how are they using the product? What do other people want? There were like a bunch of great companies that we talked to where we actually didn't close them. We like failed to sell them, but in the process of failing to sell to them, we like kept good notes on what were the things that were really interesting to them that they asked for that we said no to. And we kind of reevaluated a lot of those things, went back to the drawing board and went for more of this like full developer library that offered data access and what I would call like a variety of modalities, right? You have like pre-configured reports to, you can edit the reports to, you can edit the charts, you can build your own charts net new, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And this kind of selling this, it became what Quill is today. So I'll pause there and maybe I can add more detail if needed or answer the question in another avenue, but like.
No, that's super insightful. I mean, it's funny how you kind of started, like before I even start anything, the partnership matters. Having that co-founder, it's similar to marriage. You need that. Having a startup, I feel, is like having a baby. So yeah, sure, you could do it solo parenting, but it always makes life easier when you have two parents, dealing with the kid.
What people say is like a bad co-founder is worse than being a solo co-founder,
right.
But there's nothing better than having a good co-founder.
That's super cool, man. So fast forward into this. Now you're getting the clients. You kind of knew what to build. I'm assuming like after having these 3-4 pilot programs, you probably started seeing a pattern. Like, this is the most important feature. Let's just double down on this. And that made you pivot to this visualization software.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Yeah. So exactly right. I think it's interesting, right? Like I forget who it was, but someone just posted something on like LinkedIn or Twitter where they were like, when you start a startup, you have to have a very clear vision, and you should never deviate much from that vision if you believe in it, right? And along the way, there will be many things which cause you to question the vision. Like, it'll be harder to sell, or things will happen, or investors will tell you it's a bad idea. But the tactics or the specific things you do to accomplish the vision, you should be infinitely flexible. And so that's kind of how I feel about our story a little bit, where like the vision never really changed. The vision was always like end user data access. But the tactics to get there very much did. And like what that became is like the one thing you hear over and over again is people like, we need a dashboard. Hey, we're doing a dashboard project. So we realized, okay, to some extent we are a dashboard company. I don't think that's exceptionally sexy or exciting. But I can tell you that dashboards are very much not dead. There's a lot of stuff around them and a lot of features. You want AI features and allow people to expressively query things and get specific things into the dashboard. But at the end of the day, everything is centered around a dashboard. And so you're exactly right. That was kind of the through line that brought us to being closer to what I'd call like an embedded BI company. But yeah, after that, one thing that I guess that we had agreed on was we had both been in situations where we had raised money or done things that make you, let's say, feel good, but actually haven't created any value. And so, like in my experience, that was raising money before YC, then getting into YC, having like the YC brand, raise a bunch of money.
This was with your previous startup.
Company, but like not really having good customers, for example, or having a product that was like amazing. I think Sean felt in a similar scenario where, he'd started a previous company, had worked on stuff, had the validation of doing things like YC, raising money, having like co-founders on paper that looked very accomplished. But like if you're not serving customers, if you're not solving their problem and like making money, you're not actually creating like any value at all.
Yeah.
And so for this startup, it was really important to us that we didn't like fall into any of those traps, I guess, or like didn't dilute ourselves into thinking that we were doing something of value when you really weren't. And so we basically said that we were not going to raise money until we were actually making revenue and had product in production working with customers. And so the big thing that changed for us is by, I would say, maybe like June, July-ish of 2023 was when we actually had multiple customers that had bought relatively the same product from us. Because I think in the early days, you're like, you kind of have an idea what you're doing, but you're just like so desperate to make it work. Like you'll sell anything to anybody. Like customer A comes in, they want X, you give them X. Customer B comes in and they want Y, and you're like, Y is close enough to X. Yeah, we do Y.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, but that's not
you didn't have a one fit solution. You were just making really
so
custom.
You still don't know what you're doing, right? Exactly. I think we got to a point where we felt like this isn't perfect. We haven't figured everything out by any means, of course.
But it's still fine to begin with this model, right? Like, because you need customers, and then it also gives you an idea on what seems to be working, what not, what seems, and then you start seeing patterns probably.
I mean, I think when in doubt, my instinct, what I would tell people, but at least what I do is do stuff.
Exactly.
Like,
just make the product as long as it's sort of close to X. Does the job.
Like I do, there's a certain kind of, I call them like the McKinsey founder.
Yeah.
There's a certain kind of founder that, and not to say that there aren't like McKinsey type consultant, MBA type founders that aren't very successful. Like look at Cloudflare, for example.
Yeah.
But like there's a certain type of founder that they're really smart and they're very good at like kind of picking up knowledge and evaluating it and putting together an argument. Even if the argument's not correct, it always sounds really good.
Yeah.
And they're really good at convincing themselves that nothing is a good idea. And they do a lot of thinking and they do a lot of talking and they do a lot of like searching, but they don't do a lot of doing. There's not a lot of like building going on. And I think like when in doubt, you should just do. Because like that is almost never wasted. You just have to be not like a little bit detached. Like you have to be willing to throw away the work or restart or like change your vision. Pivot the tactics, right? But if you're willing to do that, just doing stuff, like you said, you will learn. You'll figure it out. Like even if it doesn't work, you go, yeah, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Okay, I wasn't really solving the problem. Okay, the problem is adjacent to that. Okay, that user, I don't like working with that user, but this person that they work with, I like working with that person. And you figure these things out.
Yeah, that's the principle even for anybody who's just trying to start a startup, right? They always have this assumption in their head, I need to have the perfect idea, like just have this vision, but the only way you start a startup is by just starting, like just do.
Yeah.
Because it's almost impossible that your product in your head in the beginning is going to be the one that actually is at the end,
exactly.
Right? There's going to be so many pivots. There's going to be so many learnings. And these learnings happen when you sell.
Yeah.
The day you start selling, the day you start reaching out to your customers is then you start having these, oh shit.
Yeah, actually, so this brings me to another topic, which I think, I don't know if you care about it or you're going to ask about it, but I'll mention it because I think it's interesting, is I was just talking to my co-founder, I think I made a post on this, which is I see a lot of companies, especially like YC companies, from the very beginning, the very early days, doing like bottom up or PLG go-to-market motions. And I think it's my instinct is it's a hesitancy to sell. They don't want to do the outbound selling, hard conversations.
Yeah.
So they just want to put the product out there, and if someone picks it up, great, and they start from there. And like you take like kind of like the Paul Graham Y Combinator advice. He has like I think it's like an essay called like Hill Climbing or something like that, where he kind of will argue that hitting a local maxima is like a fallacy. Like if you go hit a peak, you can always kind of come back down and find the next thing. I think there is some truth to that, but I think actually as SaaS markets get more saturated, there's less truth to that. And your first couple customers matter a lot. And so by doing the hard thing and finding your ideal customers off the bat, or by learning, hey, selling to this customer and you find they're not your ideal customer, shifting, doing the hard work to go again, find a new customer, I think is really important, because your visibility into like a market or a problem is only what you see. Like, I mean, what you see is the customers that will pay you to solve their problem. Like, even if you come from a company where you solve this problem, if you weren't like deeply embedded in it, or you weren't the actual customer buying it, it doesn't count for a lot. And even if you were, that's one data point. And so you really need to address the right problems. And if you do things in like a theoretical way, or
almost never works.
It doesn't. Right? You learn the wrong things.
Yeah.
You're not going to see the right problems. So it doesn't. So yeah. I think you just have to go out and go do the hard things.
Just test. Yeah. Got it. Cool, man. Awesome. This was actually really insightful personally for me as well as a founder. So that's awesome. So let's fast forward. Yeah. You're now as a co-founder of Quill. It's raised significant amount of money, and if I'm not mistaken, you have full-time engineers right now, right? I wanted to ask you, what was the interview process for your first hire, for your first full-time hire? That's a pretty big achievement as a founder.
Okay.
You know, we always are like first employee, first full-time employee. I'm sure there must have been so many criterias.
Yeah.
So walk me through, what was your interview process? What was the blueprint? How did that go?
Okay. So I can give you like I remember them exactly. I can give you the stories of like the first two people we like interviewed and how we went about it.
Yeah.
Or I can just give you like the how we do things now from all the stuff we learned. Because
so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how you do things now, but I want to see the delta. So let's talk about the first one.
Okay. So the first person, I remember this because it was like traumatic and we didn't end up hiring this person.
Okay.
So when we started, I think there were two things going on. One, I think this is kind of like YC advice a little bit, is like get your kind of smartest friends involved, right? And so I think there's a belief that, and this is true, right? At most startups, it's very rare that in an early stage startup, you have any ability to really attract the best people from like an on paper standpoint.
Yeah,
like
because you're risky. I get it.
You're risky. Even if you're a hot startup that's raised money, like it can be hard. And most startups are not that.
Yeah.
Right. Even if they become a great business, become hot, they don't start hot.
Totally agree.
And so one of the good ways to get quality people are these known quantities that you know from your life. Right, so that way you're not gathering some stranger. You at least know them. You know their character, their ethics, to some degree, and you know they're good. Maybe you've worked with them before. You've at least been in their life for so long enough. And so there was a guy that my co-founder had worked with in the past, and we thought, great, this guy could be a really good engineer. We've worked with him. We know he's decent. He works at not a FANG, but kind of like of that ilk, like a very big tech company with a hot brand.
Got it.
And so we were like, all right, we got to sell this guy because he's a little risk adverse. So he wanted us to come down to him. So we drove all the way down to San Jose, not crazy, but drove out an hour and a half or so down there. We grabbed lunch. We bought him lunch. Then he wanted to go get boba. So then we got boba. Then he wanted to do Topgolf. So then we took him out to Topgolf. After all that, we kind of got more to business. So then we went back to his place. And he wanted us to come back and show him the product. So then we spent like another hour, almost two, like showing him the product and giving him like use cases of the customers we were at, and did all this. And we spent like all day kind of like with this guy. And like, again, like I think I said earlier in the podcast, like I generally consider myself a people person. I'm extroverted, but I remember like driving back. The two of us were in the car driving back, and like Sean and I were always talking. And I was like, look, like, you just want to sit in silence till we get back to SF. I'm cool with that. because I don't want to talk to anybody. Like, this was so tiring to kind of like, because the problem was I don't think we had the confidence to run our own process. Like, there's nothing wrong with catering to someone or being nice to someone, of course, but I think you want to run your own process. And that was like a moment where we were completely beholden to someone else's process and just allowing them to kind of dictate the whole thing. So we just spent like, I think well over 6 hours of a day, not contributing to our business, not relaxing or resting for the next week, not doing anything, but like just hanging out and trying to kind of like get this guy to like us.
Get your first inch.
Yeah. And so then we kind of convinced him. He said he would do a trial project because we did believe in doing trials even back then. He trialed, and I think he did some work. And then there was a moment where he was like, hey, like, I'm not gonna let you see this until you pay me or something like that. And we're like, look, like, we'll pay you for the hours if you want, like, no issue there. But like, it's just like a weird vibe like we got. And so we ended up just saying, hey, you know what? You keep the work. I don't think this is a good fit. And that was our first hiring
But
process.
then you were ready to pay this guy a salary, right?
Yeah.
So he wasn't just, okay, that's kind of weird. Okay.
It was just the way he approached it.
Okay.
Like, it was very defensive, and it was like, look, like, the pay is one thing, but like, how do we move this process forward at all?
Yeah.
Without you letting us see your work? Like, you gotta like show it to us.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the whole thing was a bit odd.
Got it.
And
It's definitely an edge
And it
case.
wasn't like he worked with us for like a month. I think like a few days.
Got it.
A few hours. So that was number one. So then we were like, I think we were like, we're never doing that again. The next guy we actually hired, we leaned probably like too much. So like Kiefer Boy often says this a lot. He's like, hey, like, the problem with hiring people that are older for startups specifically, not like other companies, is they're known quantities. And when they're known quantities, they're either like known bad or known good. And if they're known bad, you don't want them. If they're known good, you can't get them. So it's not like there's like, I think there's a misconception that he said like, don't hire people over 30 or something like that. I don't think it's that. I think it's that like the people that are really good over 30 are unlikely to work for you because they never have a problem getting a job. The second they're even interested in getting a job, there's like 10 people who are like, oh, come work with me. So if you want people that are very high performers, have high alpha in some area, and are also unknown, you have to take chances. And so maybe we leaned into this a little too heavily, but we hired this guy that I think he may have finished his freshman year of college, if that. But he was like a college dropout, but not like a senior college dropout. Like the dude had barely spent any time in college. But he had worked for a previous YC company. When we gave him his project, he did a great job on his project. In hindsight, that just may not have been hard enough. It was like a back-end project, and ChatGPT is pretty good these days. And so when he actually worked with us, like he worked really hard. Like he put in the effort, and we just found like he could not get it done. Like we had too many bugs in the product. We actually had one big breaking bug that we lost. Like we have lost like one customer over this period, and we lost a customer over a bug. So we had to let him go.
Yeah.
And through these two experiences, we basically realized like, look, like we have to take hiring super seriously. Just kind of like saying, yeah, we'll keep our ears open and like seeing who we know. And then when we meet them, just kind of figuring out on the fly and figuring out who we can get. Because there were a couple other things like this where like people we met or we failed to hire or whatever it was. And so around this time, after we'd gone through a few interview processes, after we'd hired one, maybe two people, like we realized like, okay, we need a process. So then we kind of started developing this process. And what the process is that we have now is just like, it's very simple. It's everybody does a project. With very few exceptions. There are a few exceptions, and I can get into those if it's interesting, but with very few exceptions, everyone does the same project. So that way we can like compare people very well against each other because we see the same project over and over again. So we can see like, how do people follow directions? Are there things that are consistently confusing?
Yeah.
Okay. If someone does something well that almost everyone else fails, it's like especially interesting because you've seen 90 people like do this incorrectly. do they go above and beyond? Like if you see a project that's done perfectly, hits all the specs, plus they just spend a lot of time making the UX like amazing. Like they didn't have to do that, but like you know how many people have tried that. So having the same product is great. If someone does an amazing job on the project, then we give them a trial. So the project is unpaid, but there's no time limit.
Is it like a take-home?
It's a take-home.
Take-home assignment. Okay.
People spend anywhere from 4 hours to many, many, many hours.
Yeah.
There's literally no correlation between time spent and quality.
100%.
Actually there is. I would say if you spend more than 8 hours on a project, the quality actually starts to go down. Some of the best people we've seen on the project and some of the people that
it's just raw, right?
Yeah, I would say on average spent like 4 to 6 hours on the project.
Cool.
And there's one guy who was great that we actually hired that didn't even finish the project. He spent like 8 hours on it, and in the interview when he was showing us the project, he's like, yeah, I just stopped here because I wasn't willing to spend more than 8 hours. But he walked us through every decision he made. He walked us through his work, and we just really liked the way he thought and like the way he approached things.
Yeah.
And so if you do a great job on the project, we give you a trial. The trial is paid. So we'll pay you kind of like market rate salary for a week. And we want you to come into the office and work with us. So everybody that works at Quill is in person in SF every day. And so this way, it's like really a good thing for both people. I think many people like the idea of startups, or they're open to the idea of startups, but they don't actually know what that means.
Yeah.
And I think we do see it. It's very clear when people come into the office, it's clear if they like it or not.
Yeah.
And like the best employees are people that like they come to the office and they're like, oh yeah, this is great. Like, you know, we're at the table, we're all working together every day, we eat lunch together every day. You know, you need something, you just talk to people. There's no like meetings set, like one-on-one stand-ups. Like we don't have these things because we're all in person just around the same table every day. And so then in that week, we want you to ship something. So we typically have like another project, like a challenge project, something like that, something that's like fairly difficult, right? Something you can accomplish. We try to keep it independent as possible from the code base so that you're not spending that week like learning our code base, because that would just not be a good evaluation.
Yeah.
And so at the end of that week, if they're able to complete the project and ship something of value, and we generally set the project in a way that like, because what we don't want is for someone to come, do their best, do everything they can possibly do, hit all their criteria, and we still don't hire them. I think that's just really unfair, which happens a lot in interview processes. Like you're like, yeah, they did great, but there's just like this one thing we didn't like, or we didn't test this thing, we should have actually done that. And so we set the project in a way where it will be challenging, but if they do a really good job, if they kill it, they're getting an offer. And so then if you come for the week, you do the trial, we review the work, and we give you an offer, or we don't. And so it's not like you come in and your contractor will decide one day if you can be an employee. It's like, no, you're in only a week, you get an offer, you don't get an offer, that's it. And so it's super simple. And so if we're going outbound to somebody, like we see an interesting candidate, we'll do like maybe a short call up front, because it would be weird not to. It'd be weird to like outbound to someone and be like, hey, do this project.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and so we have them come in, we tell them about Quill, we answer any questions they have, and we make sure that they just feel like they have like at least a good understanding of what's going on, and then we walk them through our process. But it's a very short call. We don't like ask them interview questions. We don't ask them lead code questions. We don't ask them about their values.
Startups never do that. I've
Really?
noticed startups never do lead code almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely rare.
Yeah, I think it's because like lead code shows you maybe something around potential. It shows you thinking potential, and like I think there's companies that believe they can develop potential. It's like at startups don't have a lot of time for potential. Like it's like
Just need doers.
Yeah, it's like
Just
either
need
you can do it or you can't,
Yeah.
or the potential needs to be realized within a month. Like we don't have 6 months to a year to invest in you as a person. If you're great, we will invest everything we have in you to make you better and better and better, and consistently level you up and make you like as good as you can possibly be. And you'll probably learn faster than you ever will. Like we had an engineer here who had never really worked at a small startup before. And I remember like we had someone doing a trial, and he was just like, yeah, like you will ship 10x more code than you've ever shipped in your life at the startup. Like we ship every day. Like there's no like build this thing, then it gets reviewed, then it gets checked, then 6 months later we push in the product. And he was like, I literally, no joke, like I'm shipping 10x more code than I ever have in my entire career. So I don't think it's a better learning experience, but yes, to your point, like we don't do any of the interview stuff. It's more like, hey, hi, this is who we are, this is what we do, this is why it's an interesting market, this is why it's an interesting problem, this is why we can all make a lot of money, this is why we can help people. And then it's about like, hey, what questions do you have? Cool, this is our process. If you reach out to us, we may not even do a call. We're probably just gonna send you the project. Because the amount of people we find that actually do the project is small. The actual people who do well in the project is really small. And so we just, like, when we were doing interviews up front with everybody, like when we were like actively doing interviews, our calendars were full of just like conversations. It's like interviewing and hiring is important. Interviewing is not important. You're not moving the business forward. So we tried to just like streamline it as much as possible. Like, what's the most fair thing we can do for ourselves and the candidate, which is just look at the work. Just look at the work, evaluate nothing but the work.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we do now. And it's literally that simple. It's like, we give you a little bit of work. You do well on that, that's all we care about. We give you a lot of work. You do well on that, you get a job.
That's cool. I mean, I've noticed this with startups. With startups, it's different from like the Meta five lead code round. Like there's a whole system design round.
Yeah.
It's different. With startups, it usually is a take-home assignment like this. You do that, then they hire you for like a week, and then you really get to see a sense of how the startup is. But that 1 week period is not just good for you to evaluate the candidate, it goes the other way around.
100%.
Because like you mentioned, I think a really strong point is people don't understand how startups, some people underestimate how hard it is.
It's better that they know. Like, it's honestly better that they come
it's
and
extreme.
have like a miserable
it is
4 days.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
And they say, this is not for me. Rather than you come in, you accept the job, and like you're unhappy, and then you're having this whole debate: do I stay? Do I leave?
Especially people who come from big tech or companies that ship a bit slower.
Or even worse, like what's your international? Let's say you're on an H1B, like something like that, and you're like you're in a really tough spot.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just so much better to be honest and say like, let's do the trial, and like, look, it's for you, and like if you don't like it, that's fine. You'll know exactly what. There's no selling you. There's no like paint a nice picture. You're gonna see exactly what it is.
It is what it is.
You're going to like it a lot, or you're not going to like it. And that's okay.
Okay, cool. But what's your hiring blueprint? I mean, I get it. The work needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that's not everything.
Yeah.
Like there's probably some other cultural fit.
Yeah.
Some personality traits that you look for.
Yeah.
So what's that?
Okay, so there's actually I think a few ways I could describe this. Number one, we actually did like a what do you call it, like a review, like a performance review.
Yeah.
I've done this at other companies. I've never done it for a startup. We put together a performance review template. So one of our engineers actually asked for a performance review, which is like, I love that. Like I've been the same person. It's just like, you want feedback. And so we're like, great, like let's figure out a good way to give you feedback. So we spent a lot of time like kind of figuring out the different things. And if I think back, I could probably look it up. But actually, I'll honestly give you
the actual
categories, because this is like probably the most honest I can get in terms of like what we care about, and I can give you the softer answer.
No way. Okay, so insider performance review from a YC startup founder.
So we have 2 main categories: tangibles and intangibles. For tangibles, the categories we have is speed, quality, and then we used to have difficulty, but we took that out. Because like difficulty allows you to align what speed and quality means. Like if you're doing easy work, you're getting 10s on speed and 10s on quality. At least you're aware, like, hey, like this could change if the work gets. But we just took that out. So like that just confuses things. So we have speed and quality are the 2 things we care about from a tangible perspective. For non-tangible perspectives, we have communication, mindset, and then I believe we also have like knowledge of the code base. And so I think keeping it super simple, there might have been a couple other things that we actually added to this. This might be an old one, but I think that's about it. Is like, does the work you do, is it quality, and do you do it fast? And then the intangibles are really important for 2 reasons. Is one, like, I think if someone is amazing at their work, no matter what people say, like you're willing to give a little more lenience, generally speaking. But at the same time, like you just like if someone's unbearable, you can't work with them. And so you need people that are decent at communication, have a good mindset, all these things, just from a working relationship. But also, I think this is actually the more important one. Is it's like the way we score things is we score things like not on like your academic score. Maybe like Berkeley bell curve is the way we score things. We're like, if you get like a 7. That's a good score. Like a 6 or a 7 is a good score. And a 10 is like a 10 out of 10 is the best you could possibly do. So it's really hard. Like, this isn't like you're getting 9s and 10s very easily. Like, like even if let's say you got a 5, that would not be considered that would not be great, but it's not like a bad score necessarily. And so the way that you improve speed and quality, we believe, is through the intangibles. Like, if you don't have good communication, you don't have a good mindset, you don't have good knowledge of the code base, you're not helping other people, you're not actually going to improve your tangibles. And so that's kind of the way we think about it is, yes, you need some of those intangibles so you're just not an unbearable person that nobody wants to be around.
Yeah.
But mainly it's because those directly affect the tangibles in our mind. Is if you're like a 7 on speed or a 7 on quality, the only way you're going to get better is by improving the other things. So that's what we care about, just super directly. I would say in terms of like what we look for in engineers, we have changed our minds a little bit on a few things. And some of these are very product specific, right? And so I would say take this with a grain of salt. This is very specific to Quill. I don't think this necessarily applies to other companies, but one, like everyone needs to be full stack and needs to be able to work across the entire product. If they are, and they can specialize or be especially good at something, totally fine. If you're more of a front end guy, you're a really good product engineer, front end guy, versus you're a really good architect, back end engineer, totally fine. But if you can't, if you have a blocker where like, hey, like I'm the back end guy, now this needs to be given to that guy. I don't do front end. You're not going to fit on the team. Like the product is full stack and like very tightly integrated, where like everything kind of affects each other, and it's not very straightforward. I think if you're building a CRUD app, it's a little bit different than what we're doing, where it's just like the front end is a whole developer library. It's a product in itself. The back end is a back end SDK data API that we have to support a variety of languages and database connections. So if you support 5 databases in 5 languages, it's already 25 different data paths. Then we have like a portal where you actually control and kind of configure and orchestrate these 2 SDKs. And so, I mean, I'm sure there are many companies that do way harder product than we do, for sure. But I think on average, we're probably building 3x the amount of product out the gate as an average startup. Like if you think about each one of our products, we have 3 main components that together make one product, just the Quill platform. Each one of those things is what one company might build. And so we just found that like you have to be full stack. You have to be able to work across the entire stack. And 2, we still try to go for like that unknown talent, right? Like when possible, but we found that we can't bring on people that aren't already great engineers. Like I think there is certain situations where you can bring someone on that has, like I said, like a lot of potential, but you can help them realize that potential really fast, right? Like you can get them started on something easy and they can work their way up and they're adding value from day one and continuing to grow, and they're really smart. And they have the engineering background, but they might not have all the engineering experience. And what we find is we need people that can like deliver fairly sophisticated product on day one. And so I think a couple signals for that, for like or maybe tangible tips and tricks for people, is if you're trying to look for like younger engineers, so they don't have a lot of like professional experience, that are really great. Like number one, like you can always do the whole like company school thing, right? But that's what everyone does. So again, they're not going to be undiscovered talent if they were like at the hottest company and they went to Stanford, right? Yeah. So what we have found is really nice is people that have legitimately just built lots of stuff, especially if you've contributed to like legitimate open source projects. So there are people that like contribute to open source and they like made one commit and a suggestion and whatever. And there's people that like maintain open source projects and do a lot of the work and deeply understand that. There's people that have like, you know, coding since they were 14 and they kind of did a couple things here or there, maybe built a website. And there's people that have like, I built like 12 iOS apps and like I built this thing that actually had 1,000 users, whatever it is. And so you have to find people that have actually, going back to the just do, like go find people that have done, like actually built stuff, actually built product that people have used. And I think that's the key thing, is there's a lot of people that have built projects. Has anyone actually used your project? Besides yourself and your mother? Like, has anyone, do you have real customers, do you have real users? And so I think those are the types of things that we start to look for now.
Okay, makes sense. That was an awesome answer. Cool, awesome. So I guess people get it. I mean, obviously, if you're hiring a founding eng, if you're hiring a software engineer, shipping, quality, and then willingness to learn plays into a part here. But then how do I even break into startups? Like, how should I get into Quill's table? Like, how do I apply? Where do I apply? Should I network? Should I move to SF?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
So who are we talking to? Are we talking like college graduates?
Like new grads.
New grads?
Yeah,
Okay.
new grads. They want to break into, they want to work at Quill.
Yep.
So how do they do that?
Okay. So I think a few things. Number one is if you're a new grad, like let's say a CS major, you're a software engineer, new grad. What is your goal really? Is your goal to get a job or is your goal to work at a startup? I think some people don't know. Now, I will say I think people have a few misconceptions around what their goal should be. One of them, I think, is mentorship. I'm sure people will disagree with me, but I think of like mentorship, like with a capital M, the buzzword mentorship that people say they're looking for when they join a company, is very similar to like networking. And like, yes, there is value in networking, and there are people who are quote unquote great networkers, and there's like value to that, and there's value to their network. But the way that people become great networkers often isn't by networking. It's not by going to a conference and shaking a bunch of hands and giving them business cards. It's by doing work. It's by developing real relationships through helping people, offering advice, being there when you need them, being useful to people, being kind to people, and being someone that people want to spend their time with, being someone that like people like are attracted to, essentially.
And maybe building in public, right? Like if somebody's posting their cool project that they've built on Twitter, and that might have reached your eyes, right?
Maybe, yes, exactly. And so I think that's exactly right. It's like you want to do. And so I think a lot of people look for mentorship, but like what is mentorship? Mentorship's like an old dude who's there, who's better at coding than you.
Yeah.
Like you're not really, like what are they, they'll teach you a few things for sure. But like the way you're going to learn is by doing stuff. And you're not going to do more stuff than a startup. But that being said, like you should know what your goals are and like make sure those make sense, because I think some people go to work at a startup for the wrong reasons. And so just know, like, make sure the reasons are right. But then let's get into the tacticals of like, okay, you want it now, you're a CS major, a startup makes sense for you. How do you get a job at a startup? So number one, I think is not an option for everybody, but like you said, move to SF. Like there are certain places that are just like so obviously startup capitals, and if you can be there, it's better. And startups, like many things which are unintuitive to humans, follow like a power law. Startups in terms of outcomes, startups in terms of investing, startups in terms of networking community. And so sure, like I'm sure Austin is great. I'm sure LA is great. I'm sure New York is fine. Like, but being at the number one place is not like a little bit better than being at the number two place. Being at the number one place when a power law is involved can be 10 or 100x better than being at the number two place. And so I think if you're really committed to it, you should move to SF. And for a couple reasons. Is number one, if you move to SF, and you will have an easier time meeting people. I think just doing the thing of like, hey, I'm moving here, or hey, I just moved here, I'm meeting people. People here are generally pretty helpful. I found people to be super helpful for me. If like you're earnest and authentic, and you're not trying to like extract things from people necessarily, people will be very willing to talk to you and very willing to help. And by coming to SF, it does two things. Is one, you place yourself in a situation where people want to help you because like you're new, there's a reason, there's like, it's not like, hey, I just want to talk to you. It's like, I just moved here, I'm a student, I'm doing this. And it shows kind of like conviction. I think it shows that you can help yourself, and people want to help people that can help themselves. Nobody wants to be the guy that is like constantly doing this stuff for you. Like, I help you get to step 2. Then when you're at step 2, you're constantly needing feedback on how to get to step 3. You want to help people that like, you help them get started and they can just like do amazing things. And maybe they check back in, you can help them with something a little bit like something else, but they can do amazing things from that, and they can like really help themselves. And I think there are two types of people that ask for advice. There's those that like literally need to be guided and are looking for you to pull them along. And then there are other people who are like they're going to be successful almost one way or another. And you're just kind of, if you're lucky, you're just like changing the inflection, changing the vector like a little bit. And I think those are the people that people want to help, are the people that it seems like they're going to do something regardless.
Yeah.
And you're just changing the vector a little bit, again, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And so I think moving to SF is not only a good idea because it will actually be helpful to you, not only because of the things I mentioned, but it signals something. But then it's just like the ecosystem is unbelievable. Like you're going to have all these founders, all these investors, your friends are going to be more tech oriented. They're probably going to be other startup people.
This is true.
And
yeah.
And when your whole ecosystem is surrounded by these people, it's so much easier to make progress because everyone's thinking and talking and doing the same things. And like if you like are looking for advice, you're going to get better, higher quality advice and more of it. If you're looking for a new job, you're going to have like 10x as many ears looking out for you and all these things. So I think that's a great piece of advice. And I won't say it's easy, right? Like, and some people even say they can't do it.
Yeah. What if I can go to SF? What if I went to MIT? What if I went to some college in Michigan, some college in Arizona, and I can't? Like, I don't have that option.
Yep. So the first thing I would say is really, really dig deep on whether that's really truly not an option. So I think for a lot of people, it's not easy, it's not straightforward, so it's not an option, is really what they're telling themselves. Whereas it's not that it's not an option, it's not a comfortable option. And so that's part of the whole thing, right? You're showing that you're comfortable with discomfort and you're willing to do something. Like, look, I think there are stories, I know people personally that have moved to SF with very high risk, almost nothing. And so there's always someone that had a little bit harder. Now, let's say you really can't move to SF. Like I just want to caveat this that like, hey, I think it can often be a cop out, but let's say you can't move to SF. Try and participate in SF. So if you follow like Balaji or any of these people, like network state ideas, like some people argue like startup, Silicon Valley is now in the cloud. So you should go find these spaces and these people that can create a Silicon Valley SF environment. Now, I think you have to be careful here because you don't want this to become like, I'm the chronically online guy that just kind of like follows communities and threads, is on Twitter, and like I know what the latest meme is, but I'm not actually learning anything.
Yeah.
So then you want to be careful to make sure that you're actually benefiting from this, or you're using it as a way to find opportunities for you to contribute to something. But finding a community, I think, is really important, even if it's like a virtual or online community. Just don't make it like a social media, terminally online thing.
No, I get your point. It does have a lot of merit because people say the same thing about Hollywood. Like if you want to become an actor, moving to LA does help.
Yeah.
Even before you became an actor, just being in that space naturally gets you opportunities. Your network comes in. Same thing for finance with New York. And SF is very synonym with startup.
Yeah.
Startup, SF, they're one thing.
Yep. There's a different vibe and culture here. I just think people in SF tend to be...
It's just a more cracked engineer.
Yes. And they're more helpful. Like there's like a selfish altruism at play where it makes, when everybody around you, like, and you've seen it, like could be the next hot person. Like, and it happens a lot where people come out of nowhere, build something great. Like, for example, like when I met you like 2 years ago, you were working on something that like, I think you kind of said, hey, it wasn't really working. Now you're working on something else. Like that quickly you pivoted and all of a sudden you have a user with like, you're like, we have 1,000 users. And it's like, you know, when we engaged before, just because you didn't have the perfect idea before, I was still like, hey, you're doing stuff, you're working hard. Like we should definitely connect and have a relationship because like, you know, you're probably going to figure something else out, you know? And so when that's the ecosystem, people are really willing to help people. And like you could say it's altruism, but I think it's like a selfish altruism where like it's altruistic in the short term, but really long term it's like a selfishness because you should help these people because they will likely be people that can help you and are worth helping and all these things. And so I think people are a lot more helpful in that way too. But yeah, I mean, continue, sir, if you had a question.
No, that was a great answer. I mean, especially if you're like, so he did mention the whole thing about, do you even want to work in a startup? You should probably figure that out, but it makes a lot of sense. If startup is your thing, move to SF.
Yeah.
It does significantly help. I know exactly what he's saying. I'm a startup founder, and it's also the same edge for us as founders.
Yeah.
To be in SF, you get many opportunities here, you get many clients here, investors, things move faster. So that's awesome, dude. Now, a lot of people are like, they're probably thinking, why work at a startup in the first place?
Yeah.
I don't know about Quill, but usually it's a lot of hours, lesser pay, or at least same pay as big tech, but then I'm working way more. So from a finance point of view, statistically, you're going to make more money in big tech.
Yeah.
Startups are hard. The odds are against us usually. So why work in a startup?
Okay, so when you say statistically you will make more money in big tech, that is if you play with the numbers. So what I mean by that is you take somebody and you put them on a big fame track, and you have them working there for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So you accrue all their salary, the bonuses, whatever, and you say how much money do they make over 10 years?
Yeah.
And you take a startup person and you say, what does the average startup employee make? Does the average startup employee have equity that's worth anything? And then you multiply that by 10 years. But those are actually comparing paths that aren't really realistic. The Fame path is realistic. There are many people that join Fame, they're there for 5, 10, 15 years, whatever.
Yeah.
But the path of someone joining a startup, going to a shitty startup, it failing, going to another shitty startup, it failing, and doing that for 10 years almost never happens. I think what's more likely is people either have a bad startup experience, leave, but they learned a lot from that experience and they move on to something else, or they have a good startup experience and they go back or whatever it is. I think it's more thoughtful than that. And so keep that in mind, because I think the answer, that matters, that context matters. So the reason startups are good, or you should join a startup, comes down to one thing, and then there's a bunch of things that branch off of this. Do you believe in yourself? If you are an average person or below average person, and ultimately you are looking for a system to carry you, you should not join a startup. If you're good, but you're not great. If I work really hard, I can get my Google job. But look, I don't work that hard. I'm not that clever. I'm not that smart. Ultimately, I don't believe in myself that much. You should go to Google, because the system will protect you, and you can stay in that job, make a good living, etc. But it'll be really hard to outperform. You go to Google and you either get promoted in a year and a half or in 2 years. That's the band. There's no getting promoted in 6 months. It just is what it is. There's no doing some amazing project your second year. Maybe your stories of it's really rare. In a startup, you will see more of the business, do more things, get more experiences, have real relationships with other people faster and at a higher rate than you will anywhere else. So you will build your network faster. You will build your skills faster. You will build your ability to discern the ecosystem in the world around you faster. You'll understand what a good product looks like. Being with founders who have to literally there every day, talking to users, selling stuff, what works, what doesn't work. I think you have a very fundamental understanding of how a business is built, how it works, and you can use that fundamental understanding to evaluate other things. People talk a lot about trying to think of what's the word. It's completely what's the thing Elon talks about a lot of where you think from first principles, right? So people talk about first principles. That's what you're learning at a startup. You are essentially learning first principles. And when you learn first principles, you can easily apply those to other things. If you're working at a very large machine, you're not learning first principles usually in most cases. You're learning things that are very specific to that environment, that product. You're building on essentially multiple layers of abstractions. The company has created these abstractions over time that sometimes you don't even know why things are done the way they're done, because that person's not there anymore. You just tribal knowledge is built up, and they're that's the way we do it because it broke last time or something. I don't know, but you're learning that fundamental knowledge. And so I think what I say is if you believe in yourself, if you think you are great or can be great, then you should consider a startup. Because if you are great and you work at it, one, it's another reason to be an SF is you will find better startups.
Yeah.
There's a higher density of higher quality startups. Also, by being a good startup, being around people who understand good startups, you'll be able to evaluate startups better. You have a better sense of what a good company looks like. If you live in Connecticut, no offense to Connecticut, but
That
You're-
one user, that one viewer
You know,
is like, hey man.
You're working like, you're probably like the one company in Connecticut that raised money.
Yeah.
So they're hot out there.
Yeah.
We raised $1 million. And so like they attract people and they're like,
Yeah,
people work
but
there.
yeah, I think it's just common sense. Quality of startup matters.
And they have a bad experience.
Yeah.
Like, startups aren't any good. It's like, well,
Yeah.
that startup was a bad experience. So I think like that's what it comes down to. Do you believe in yourself? And if you believe in yourself, you can learn a lot. And look, what the thing is either way, whether the company fails or succeeds, it's going to be great. Because if it succeeds, not only are you going to get that salary and all that learning, but you're probably also going to make a bunch of money off of equity. If the company doesn't succeed, you still get all those learnings. You still got paid probably okay, if not decently. But the kind of final thing is, if you're in a good environment, if you're around good, high quality people at a good startup, it doesn't actually matter if the startup succeeds or fails, because those are the people that are doing stuff. You know what I mean? So like whether or not that works, those are gonna be the people that run things somewhere else. Like I think that Paul Graham literally had this tweet where like when you join a startup, it doesn't matter if it fails, because those are the people that are gonna be running things in 10 years at the big companies. Because like those are the people that then go on to do other things always. Like look at there was this, they did like the show on General Magic. Like great talent, great place to be, totally failed. But like those networks of people all started great companies like YouTube and a bunch of other kind of like huge companies.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's the thing. The problem is if you're shitty, all those people are going to know it. There's nowhere to hide. And so you got to be good so that the other people will want you in their network and take you along with you. So yeah, actually, I actually said this to one of our engineers early on, kind of in the process. Like I think he was debating between us and actually like a very large tech company. And I said, like, look, like I think it's a question of like whether you believe in yourself, and like I have no fault if you want to take like a less risky path. But look, like the risk is not nearly as high when you actually believe in yourself.
That is true. That is completely true. I mean, that's cool, man. I think that's a perfect answer. I actually have nothing to add. I usually add something after each answer, but I think you kind of nailed it. I think you definitely nailed the question to that question. So cool. When we're trying to wrap it up, so what's next for Quill as a company itself? What's next for you?
Yeah, so let's see. Sell more product.
Is it scaling right now?
Yeah, so I'd say, let's see, like the quick, like couple lines on like where Quill is we were very diligent on like, I think figuring out what the product shape needed to look like early on and making sure we were working with companies that were large enough that were seeing real problems and not working with people that like may have wanted our solution, but like didn't have the problem space that was highly valuable. Then you have to build the product. And like I kind of already talked about, we have a very complex product. There's a lot to do. And so it definitely took us some time to do two things. Is one, actually really three things. Is one, feature parity with basic things people expect. Like you don't have to have everything, of course. We're not going to have every BI feature that like Power BI has, who's been developing their product for like 30 years. But you have to have the things people want and expect. You know, you need to be able to build charts, you need filters, whatever it is. Number two is you need to build the interesting things. Is you need to be able to have enough differentiators that people are willing to take a bet on you. Because ultimately, like you have to have so many reasons why we are so much better that you're like, even though I should never work with this company, I have to work with this company, right? Because it's like, who in their right mind is going to pick the 2-person startup with like almost no money that you don't really know what's going to happen to their product? They just built it like 6 months ago. Like your product has to be so much more interesting to convince that person. So you have to do those two things. You have to have, and this is if you're not in a saturated space, maybe number one doesn't apply as much. But if you're in a saturated space, you can't choose between like table stakes and interesting features. Like you have to have both, otherwise people will just pick the alternative. And this is probably a third thing, which is all has to work. So you can't choose between stability, table stakes, and interesting features. If you're in a saturated space, you need to do all three. And so that's really been our goal over the last few months, is working with our existing customers to make sure everything is perfect for them, making sure they're not seeing bugs on the platform, making sure their experience is like what you call delightful, making sure that all the basic things they expect, because you have people that maybe switched off a Metabase or switched off of a competing product. Yeah. And they're like, hey, well, I got this in the last product. And you maybe don't agree with every product decision, but you have to at least solve their problems, right? And then you have to constantly work on your differentiators. You can't just build table stakes features. If you're not constantly working on your differentiators, the new startups will catch up to you. And so I think we're at a point where these three things have finally converged, and we have all three now. And so now we're in a phase where we're going back up to kind of these larger companies that would have been unapproachable for us in the beginning of the company. In the beginning of the company, we were lucky to get a couple like larger companies, and we could only work like one at a time, really.
Yeah.
We couldn't support more than 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
And now we're at a point where we're like, okay, we can onboard a large company, we can make them happy, everything's gonna work, they're gonna have like all the features they need, plus all the differentiators that make us really exciting. And so now like our goal is to find some of these larger companies. Like I mentioned earlier, we're working with like our first non-startup company, which is really exciting for us. I think there's a lot of companies are great companies. We love them as customers. For us, they're quite large. But when you think of things in the grand scheme of things, like a Series C startup is actually quite a small company.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, like we close a Series C startup.
That's a huge.
We're celebrating.
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's a huge deal.
And it's like a logo we know. They have great investors. They have like a real business, and they have customers, and they're doing really well. And you get really excited, and you just like, but then you remember like, okay, we have a long way to go. Like going from a Series C startup to a Fortune 1000 company is actually like we are so much closer to the Series C startup than the Series C startup is to the Fortune 1000 company. And so we got like, I would call them a mid-market company, like a company in the healthcare space. They are not a startup. They've been around for a while. And so it's like boring B2B SaaS stuff, but we're like, we got our first not startup customer.
That's cool, man.
So, like,
congratulations.
That's really exciting. So that's our goal, is to get some more, of course, great hot startups. We love those guys too. And actually they're some of the best companies to work with, honestly, because they like the hot startups in a way, if you want to put it that way, like the Series B, Series C startup, they're the ones that are trying to like differentiate themselves. And so those are the folks that I think make your product
really good, right?
Yeah. So the people, like the old school people, force you to have a very high fidelity product. Everybody forces you to have table stakes. And the really new kind of startups, the Series B, C startup, forces you to have the differentiators. So I think having this mix of customers is nice.
I think that's a very cool take in it. Yeah, I've noticed this too. Big, you just need to be compliant, stable, extremely stable. You ideally would have raised. They care more about, will this not, screw up anything for us?
Yeah.
Whereas these startups, the younger companies, the smaller team companies, the differentiators, like, I need something very cool. I need this. Okay, that's a cool.
For this healthcare company, when we sold to them, for example, like the whole React library thing, like I think they thought it was cool. It was not a deal breaker at all if we gave them an iframe, to be honest. Like that was not the problem. The biggest thing that attracted them to us was the way our backend is architected for security reasons. Is we have a really interesting way to keep all data and PII in a customer environment without them having to add new infrastructure or use a container. And it was like, it's the least sexy thing ever. Is we're talking like data security, backend architecture, and like that's what they really like. That's what the big healthcare company likes.
Yeah, the bigger they are, they probably care more about compliance, security, privacy, all that stuff.
Basically they were like, oh, we have to go with you because you're like the only company that can actually work with our architecture.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so that's why we won that deal. And over time, as they needed things, us having the front end React library is great because there's certain problems we've been able to solve for them that would have been really difficult or impossible to solve for them if we didn't have our front end the way it was.
Yeah.
So there's certainly formatting things and stuff that the customers want that we're able to solve.
Yeah.
But like in terms of them being excited, they just didn't care about what we cared about like at all.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, hey man, whatever works. Cool. Last question for you, Rishi. Are you hiring right now?
We're always hiring.
Okay, cool. Look, so what positions are you hiring
more
for?
Work than we can handle. I have like a list of asks for the engineering team constantly. Like there's literally a customer, like a really great Series A company that I talked to on Friday last week. You've probably seen them all over LinkedIn. They're super hot. And they came to us. They said they needed a new solution. They wanted to look at us. And honestly, like I wanted to tell them like, yes, we can do this 100%. And they had like a very strict timeline. And I was like, look, like I just don't even think we have the bandwidth to be able to hit your timeline. And it's just like really sad when like you can't serve somebody, like,
Yeah.
And it's like, so we're certainly hiring.
Awesome.
We are hiring for full stack engineers and you heard all my criteria
Yeah.
already. So
Yeah. If somebody still asks him after they have seen our video, like, dude, what's your hiring criteria? You messed up. Okay, you're hiring for full stack. Anything else? Any non-tech? Any other positions?
That's it. We are a very engineering-driven company, and our next probably 3 hires will still be all engineers.
Okay, cool.
So everything non-engineering. At some point, when I am not sleeping anymore, we'll add some non-engineers.
Okay, awesome, man. All right, thank you so much, Rishi. This was awesome, man. Really appreciate you doing this, dude.
Of course. Thank you.
Awesome. So that's it, man. That's